Is here so far. We'll give everyone another 60 seconds or so. Everyone, appreciate you all making time yet again to join us here. I'm excited about this week. You'll see us going back and forth quite a bit here. So I'll go ahead and share my screen now.
My excitement level is a 10. Oh crap! It's not just showing up on my thing. My excitement level is a 10 this week.
We might have to get rid of the fancy background today.
Okay.
But as always, welcome everyone. I'm Christian. I'm with our Turn Action Network, here with Jonathan, as always, from 50 Can. Thank you yet again for participating in this process. And what we're going to do here is talk about the best and worst tactics we can talk about. But before that, I just want to there's a few new people on today, so just quick rundown of what you should anticipate here. Jonathan, can you give us what Election Essential is all about?
It's all about teaching people how to be involved in elections. Christian and I work with advocates all over the country, and we want to take them from just being issue advocates to being electoral advocates, and why we think that's going to make them better at accomplishing their goals. We're going to focus on basic fundamentals, give you some news and insights that might talk to you about what's going on and how that can apply to what you're doing. And then we're humble about it. We learn from great people who have experiences. We know other people with experiences in politics. So we know there's other perspectives, and we're eager to hear them. So just know that we're always open and receptive to learning new things. So.
Yeah, we got a bunch of emails this week about other topics we should get into, and thoughts and concerns about like issues that we've talked about in the past. So any notes or questions you might have, send them our way. We have at least 2 more sessions after this, probably even more. We've been getting a lot of great feedback about things we should go into. So again, this is just the essentials. Again, someone who's going to really get into that political stratosphere for maybe not the first time, or maybe at a different degree for the first time. What we're going to likely talk about in the future is how to do things, go really in deep on some issues, best practices from the sector. So any suggestions, ideas you have, bring them our way. But today we're going to talk about best and worst electoral tactics. You're going to see this is going to be really interactive. We went all out with whiteboards and markers and polls. So that's what you're about today. Next week is all the things you should be thinking about to ask a lawyer on how to get involved in independent expenditures, or if you're in a state or city that allows coordinated races, what questions you should be asking your lawyer. And after that, we're going to talk about polling. I can't speak highly enough about polling and the importance it is to an organization. My foundational thinking is that a lot of people do polls, get funded to do polls, fundraise to do polls, and they don't leverage the actual magnitude of power that comes with polls. So really excited to jump into that next week. But Jonathan, tell us a little about yourself and how you came up with this book.
So I'm at 50 Can. I've been doing elections and advocacy for 18 years. I'm a local elected official as well, and really enjoy serving in that way and dealing with the community and dealing with small and large issues. And I wrote this book last year. My boss really encouraged and pushed me to do it, and it's just a collection of things that I felt that people that are involved with issue advocacy could do to be more effective at politics, whether formally or as an organization or as a group of people. So you can find that on our website and download the PDF or purchase a copy on Amazon.
Yeah, and I'm Christian Esperias, the director of campaign strategy for our Turn Action Network. Been doing this kind of work for 10 years now. Had the pleasure of working on school board races all the way up to presidential races. And I'm really excited to be doing this. As I said, I can't give Jonathan enough credit for that amazing book that he wrote, and creating this space that we are all in here, because electoral work, especially electoral work that comes from advocacy, is such a lonely space. Not a lot of people do it. Not a lot of people know the intricacies and balance between the two. Elections are usually, crash and burn, and who cares what happens because you're not around for after election day, and advocacy is the polar opposite of that. So, Jonathan's book is an amazing resource, and we're hoping that we're doing it service and getting the job across here. But we're excited to have everyone here, and we're going to jump into it. So this week, we're going to get into what's interesting, a few interesting headlines that really are important to some of us on this call, and to the greater sector of people who are in advocacy and electoral work. We're going to go over 2 major categories. One are low cost tactics, and then other tactics that would usually trigger independent expenditures or some kind of filing, because they do get quite pricey. And then as always, we'll always have room for Q&A. So mine isn't loading here. So Jonathan, let's go with yours first.
Okay, so my topic of the week was actually happened last Tuesday, but sort of the news is coming in about this. We had elections in Nebraska, and that's where I live, for those that don't know it. And I have to admit something. I know I'm not supposed to. I'm supposed to be perfect and not admit when we make mistakes. I always love the question that candidates get asked: did you ever make a decision you thought was wrong, or did you ever? And I'll straight up say, when this started, I said, I think there will be a difference between states that automatically send ballots to the voters, like here's your ballot, vote, versus states that send them a absentee request, and then the voter has to turn in the absentee request, and then the ballot comes in, and they got to send the ballot in. I was assuming that was too much for voters, that would be at the very least a status quo election, and I'll just straight up say I was absolutely incorrect. I was completely wrong. In my state, they sent absentee requests to people. The voters turned them in massive numbers, and then the voters voted in massive numbers. So I think that's what that's telling me, is that we're going to have a really high turnout this election. I don't know what that's going to mean, but I think more people are going to vote. And in my state, 41% of voters requested an absentee ballot. And in the end, of course, not everyone voted. People who requested it, there were some that didn't end up voting, but in the end, 34% of the population voted. In the last presidential cycle, 2012, only 22% people voted in the primary. So again, I'm owning that I was wrong, or at least I presented a hypothesis that I thought, this could work out, but differently. And that's not what happened. So if Nebraska is any indication, and we've got some other elections coming up that are going to tell us similar information, I think we should get ready for big turnouts.
I find that so fascinating. I wish I would have known you would have picked this, because I would have picked there was a special election here in California for Congressional District 25. And the governor Long had sent out vote by mail ballot, and you could vote in person. And turnout was dismal. And this was a blue wave district, which was won by, I think, like 8 points in 2018. Well, in the special election, the Republican won back the seat by nearly 10 points, and voter turnout was like dismal. And so I wonder what it says. It does, because I would have been with you. I would have said, like, having them fill out an application, turn that back in, and then voting, that's just too many steps for the average voter. But the fact that they did it tells me two things. One is that they have a high confidence and faith in, like, the Secretary of State and, like, the voting process, which I think a lot of people, when I tell people to register to vote by mail, they always say, well, I don't trust the mail, or I don't trust this. And the second thing is that they're really excited to vote. So that this is really interesting, especially after I saw the beating of low voter turnout in the congressional district.
Nebraska is just a great place to live, but we only want so many of you to move here, because we got to keep our social distances.
I think there was like a Time magazine piece, or like a New York Times piece that just came out yesterday, said, like, why aren't we all moving to Montana? So be ready for a lot of New Yorkers and Californians to be out there.
Sure.
Let's see if mine loads this time. If not, I can just give an overview. So I'll see if it loads, but the headline reads that the governor of California has proposed a number of budget cuts across the state. The reason I'm bringing this up is the time is now, right? Like, if your state hasn't, or if your governor or state hasn't already announced it, there are budget cuts that coming. A lot of the state of California is about $25 billion in deficit because of the shutdown. And he's made recommendations, large hitting cuts, mainly to education and to Medi-Cal here in California. And the reason I want to share this is because I think this is going to have a ripple effect across the country, right? California is, I think, the 7th largest economy in the world. So what happens here has a ripple effect across the rest of the country. And so what I'm foreseeing is a lot of governors coming up and saying, we're going to make budget cuts. And as we often know, the public sector is the main place where those budget cuts have to happen, and a lot of it happens in education and in other social programs. And so I think this is interesting because we dedicate our lives to advocacy and electoral work, and I think as people are seeing and feeling the cuts to their programs that they love and trust, there's going to be a lot of turnover, whether it's electoral seats or just public sentiment. We've been riding the wave of a while of like the blue wave federally. I wonder what's going to happen in some of these deep blue states who are making really deep budget cuts, how that's going to impact electoral work moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I'm interested how it's going to impact debates, whether it's a Democratic primary or Republican primary. Every voter is going to have to confront the fact there's going to be budget cuts to government. And I don't know. I think it's going to take a lot of polling and time to figure out what voters think we should do about that. But that's going to absolutely tie into people's elections. And some people are going to want to spend, and some people are going to want to cut, and some people are going to want to tax. And I don't know that you can predict right now what people with different ideologies are going to think about that, because I think it's just too early.
I completely agree. I think what we can do, though, if you're in advocacy, is like get ready, right? Because
Sure.
if usually the first go about is like cuts across the board, and you want to be prepared to make the case that why your department shouldn't be cut. And so I think this is a really good organizing opportunity to not only plant your flag, draw your red line, and be ready for that battle, but also start building coalitions to make sure that you're not on the island by yourself. And also start looking at some of those electoral maps. I think unfortunately what's going to happen is, like, while budget cuts are being discussed now, the greater public won't feel them by November, hopefully. So this is like a year or two out from now, but it's a good time to start organizing. So we're going to jump into this week's topic, which is best and worst organizing tactics. So we're going to start with the first one. So it's free or low cost campaign tactics. So again, these are all campaign tactics that you can do on your own individual time, or maybe even can do it during work hours, because depending on your state laws, they don't trigger you having to file or report anything. So what we're going to do here, it's a pretty easy game we're going to play. Jonathan and I are going to play. We all have a whiteboard, and we're going to tell you from score 1 through 10, 10 being the best possible tactic, 10 being very highly effective, 1 being not effective at all, how effective these tactics are. So we're going to jump into it.
And we're going to go pretty quick. So if you have questions about a topic, we're going to try to go fast. So probably less than a minute per topic. So if you have questions about it, if you want to expand on a tactic, just ask us in the Q&A in the chat. And I know we already have one question. We'll get to those at the end. So keep firing them in there. And occasionally we'll ask you what you think about the tactic. So be ready for a few poll questions your way.
All right. So the first one we're going to jump into is endorsements. We talked about endorsements for quite a while. The timeline of endorsement typically happens like 4 months to a few weeks before election day, when they usually happen. And the price range is usually free. There's usually not a cost to give someone an endorsement.
And Christian and I don't know what each other are going to say. This is totally.
We don't. So
okay.
we're going to surprise each other. So
right,
the pros of an endorsement for you as an organization giving an endorsement is that it sends a signal. It sends a signal to your membership, to your allies. The other reason I think it's a really good pro, it allows a lot of organizations that usually don't get into the electoral space. It allows you an entryway into that arena, and for free, quite frankly. You don't commit any dollars to doing this. Do you see the cons is empty? Because I really couldn't think of any cons of making an endorsement other than if you have a losing track record, right? Like, you don't want to be the organization that always endorses losers. But that being said, Jonathan, what do you give endorsements?
Give it a 5. I'm neutral. I think they're fine, but like you said, I don't want to see any. It's not that big a deal. Good 5, just kind of sure.
So I gave it a 9. Yeah, I gave it a 9 because I think, as for organizationally speaking, it's really empowering, right? Like, now you're getting candidates to come court you, kiss your ring, and talk about your issues. So I think in terms of effectiveness on the issues you care about as an organization, I think it's up there.
I can't argue with that. I think you're overhyping it, but I can't argue with your points. So, okay.
Yeah, I would say it's not effective to voters.
Okay. All
right. The next one we have is House meetings. So House meetings typically happen 6 months to going up to GOTV. If it's a presidential election, it usually starts like as early as 18 months before election day.
I just threw the poll up so people can vote what they think about house parties.
Yeah. The price range is free to a few $100s. It depends. Like if you want it catered, parking in LA, we're very like, it's kind of gross what the house parties look like in some of the wealthy areas in LA. So I won't mention that, but they're typically free. And the pros and cons of it. All right. So the pros is you build community support. The cons is like, it's not effective unless you do it at volume. That's like the real hard part about house parties. Like unless you do it at volume, it's not going to be productive. It's also really time consuming to plan and organizing a successful one.
I've made my decision. You ready?
All right, go for it.
Okay, same time. Okay, I give it an 8. I love house parties. A 9. I think house parties are great. I think the candidates love them. We talked about them last week. It's a really efficient way for candidates to meet people. It's good for your organization. It makes everyone happy. So I gave it an 8. What does our voting public think? We have some 5s, a 9, a 10. It's all over the place.
There's a few 2s. I would,
Yeah, they're time consuming, but if you can get 10 of your friends together, I think the candidate will like it. You'll like it. So, all right.
Yeah, I think to your point, I gave it a 9. This is where I cut my teeth on community organizing is through house parties. I am still yet to find a more effective campaign tool to building name ID and actual community support than this. It is highly effective.
All right. So what we got next?
All right. Next, we got campaign forms.
Oh.
All right. So candidate forms. So this is some, we haven't really talked about this, but this is something that's actually pretty popular, making sure that candidates go up on stage and give real clear answers on things. This typically happens closer to election day. So it's usually around 3 months before election day or even GOTV. Again, the price ranges. Sometimes you can get like a space donated for free. Sometimes you cater, sometimes you don't. It really just varies. But you shouldn't be spending more than a few $100s on this, to be honest with you. I've seen people spend like a couple $1,000s, but that's because, I think like 800 people showed up.
Yeah.
So this is one. So the pros of having the candidate form, it could help with name ID. Like a lot of community members like to go to attend these kind of things. They go in there not knowing anything about candidates, so it's really good. It sends signals to the community.
Yeah.
As an organization, it verifies whether a candidate is aligned, right? This is going back to Jonathan's lesson, is like verify that they're telling you the truth, make them say it in public. The cons of this, it's incredibly, incredibly time consuming. It's hurting cats, especially if you do this in partnership with other organizations.
Yeah.
Jonathan, what do you give this?
I gave candidate forms a big whopping 2.
Ooh.
I think the only people, unless we're talking about presidential or governor, I think the only people that watch are people that already know what they think. And so unless you can pack a room and show a candidate how impressive your organizing work is, don't waste your time. Let other people organize the forums. You focus on other things.
So you made me change my answer. I'm not gonna lie. I was giving it a 6, and then I heard your response and I changed it to 4 because I think you're right.
Yeah, and we got some 7s. We got no one voted as low as me. There's a 3. Mostly people were in that 7 to 8 range, and I'll just tell those people that voted that way, you're wrong.
No, you're right. You're not gonna change. It's not an effective tool when it comes to changing hearts and minds, right? Like it's really more for an organizational practice.
All right. So what do we got next?
All right, sign waving.
Okay.
I got a little guest here, so forgive me for the time being on it. So
that's all right.
Sign waving. All right, so it's usually done during GOTV. The price range is usually free. It's usually a volunteer wave effort. And so when I Googled sign waving pictures, this article came up. So someone at the Honolulu Political Times wrote the 11 do's and don'ts. And apparently, so Hawaii is one of the states that I haven't worked in.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated to learn more about this, but Hawaii apparently takes sign waving very, very seriously.
I was told this by people I work with in Hawaii. So what do we have what are our cons? And
so the pros is it helps with name ID somewhat, send signals to the community that you have community support. Cons, you have to do it at volume. It could get expensive. Oh, yeah, it could get expensive if you have to pay people to do it, and it's not targeted. So what do you give sign waving?
3. Oh wait, I made a mistake when I wrote that. -3.
You stole my line. I was gonna go negative, but I gave it a fat 0.
The only value of sign waving is you have volunteers who want to help you on election day and you need to give them something to do. That's so I
I
give
would even say
that.
not that. I would say that the only reason you should ever do sign waving is if it's like a tradition in the community you're in. Like if
Yeah,
it's a cultural thing, you go, you get your candidate there for 5 seconds, do the photo op, and then go back to knock doors. Like
I'm
you give
backing
them an
up.
opportunity to go knock doors.
If you have volunteers on election day, they should be calling voters, not standing on the street corner. So I give there's no reason you should sign waving. And with all due respect to my Hawaii friends. Okay. So
I
what's
mean,
our next one?
I agree, but sometimes you got to give into the cultural norms.
Yeah.
Community.
All right. All right.
All
Text.
right,
Okay.
text banking.
Interesting.
All right, so text banking. It's kind of a new science, right? Like sometimes it happens a year out. But when I've seen it, especially on local races, it's never more than 8 weeks out from election day. It's usually a GOTV effort. And for those who don't know the jargon, get out the vote is the last 4 days of elections referred to as GOTV. The price range, again, varies depending on who you use, how much volume you do, but it's somewhere around 8 to 10 cents per text. Just depends on what demographic you use. So pros, I think it might help with name IDs. It's targeted. This is something I'm going to stress a lot. If it's targeted, it's usually going to be a good thing. If it's not targeted, I usually give it a low score. So I'm tipping my hand here to you, Jonathan. It could help with volunteership. So I've spoken with 2 different presidential campaign primary candidates, and they said they all use texting to do a myriad of things, mainly, but what they found very effective is for volunteerships and donations.
Right.
And then the cons, again, you have to do it at volume for it to matter, and it can get very expensive depending on how big your list is. So as a tactic, Jonathan, what do you give this?
6.
Ooh, not far behind. I get a 5. So what's your logic behind the 6?
I did have it higher just because I thought, what the heck, do it. I think it's slightly unproven for swaying voters, but I think you said it could be expensive, but, it also can be cheap if you have like a low turnout election or whatever. So I think it's probably harmless and it could help you with your volunteers. I think focus on what it's good for and don't put too much eggs in that basket, but try it out and use it and focus on what it's really good for, which are volunteers and donations.
Yeah, I really would want someone to do an experiment on this, that like a trusted source, because I honestly think that the way I view text messaging is the reason people love it so much is because the open rate is so high,
right.
as opposed to like an email or even a piece of mail. And so if that's the case, I just see this as like a cheap name ID tactic, right? And you're hoping it sticks. So I think if that's a ticket, then you would have to do it at a frequent rate. And it could, especially for like state legislative races or local municipal races, I think it might make a difference. I think when you're talking about like governor's races and above, or Senate and congressional races, something that's really like D versus R, something that's really contested, I do think that that's where like volunteers and donations come in effect.
Good point. For a lower race, it's good with name ID. Yeah. For a bigger race, it's good for volunteers.
Yeah, I would imagine.
A bigger race, they don't need name ID, they're getting it.
Right.
But a lower rate, yeah, I could see that.
I don't think it would work for persuasion at all, though. I would imagine.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yard signs.
I'm going to throw a poll up on this one here. So we'll let
yard signs. How important are yards? This is a oldie but goodie debate between me and Jonathan. Yard signs. They typically start going up 4 days ahead of time. I cannot tell you how many arguments I've had to have with people about why yard signs aren't available 2 years ahead of time. So the price range varies, but they usually cost somewhere around like $5, like as cheap as $2, as expensive as $8 per. It just depends on the volume you get them. So pros, they can help with name ID and send signals to the community that you have community support. Cons, you would have to do it at volume. Again, volume is a big thing. Scaling is a big thing. It can get really, really expensive. And it's not targeted at all. By putting a yard sign on a corner street doesn't necessarily talk to the right voter. So we're seeing a lot of responses here. Jonathan, what do you give it?
So I give it a 1. So I give it a 5 because I think that, okay, so here's why I give it a 5. I understand. I think neighbors see yard signs and and also I will tell you as a candidate, I think I might have said this in a webinar. When I ran for city council the first time, I would drive around town, and every time I saw my sign, it would fire me up. I'm like, yeah, let's go, you know. And every time I saw my candidates or my opponent's sign, I go, what are they voting for him for? You know, I gotta. So I don't know. I understand they don't win elections completely, but I also think they can be done from somewhat organically as you're doing door knocking. Would you like a sign? Great. Like, I don't feel like it's a huge investment of your time, but it is costly. So I give it a 5 because whatever.
I think you're foreshadowing this reading a headline that says like you got caught taking down your opponent's yard
Oh
sign.
no, but it did happen to me, but I did not do it to my opponent.
Yeah.
I don't think my opponent. I think it was just a prankster. But
Yeah, I would.
So we had about half the people were in that middle range where I was, and about half the people where Christian was. So no one gave it a 10.
Yeah, I don't think you should be spending money on yard signs unless you have to. Quite frankly, like unless the candidate or the community really is pushing you to do it, and even then do it at such a low rate. All right, so now we're talking about like much more costly campaign tactics. So text banking should probably have gone in here, but this is something like that really absolutely would require independent expenditure that requires some research and things of that nature. So this is a different playing field, right? Like this is a different grading scale from the ones we just saw. So swag, so this is all like yard signs would fall in here, but it's like T-shirts, iPhone covers, things of that nature. Timeline, especially for like governor races and below, we're looking about like 3 months like election time. Price varies, like whether you want a T-shirt or a hat or a canvas bag. The pros, it could raise name ID. It could help with enthusiasm. It sends signals. Cons, hasn't been proven to increase turnout at all, and it's expensive. Jonathan, what do you give it?
Yeah. I mean, the only people that want to buy your swag are everyone who's voting for you. So if perchance like you can get more money out of them because of it, like donate $50 and get this free button. But that to me is a revenue question, not a strategy question, which I get, you know. I don't waste your money unless it's specifically tied to a fundraising campaign. That's what I should say. If it's tied to a fundraising campaign, but don't just start buying swag and handing out swag. So that's what
I could not agree with you more, right? Like I think especially in the lower level races, like if you're not, even governor races, honestly, sometimes wouldn't merit this. But it is a great fundraising tool, especially if you have a donor or like a deal with like a print shop that can print out shirts or canvas bags easily. It's a great fundraising opportunity.
The only people that actually like swag is the American History Museum in DC, so they can put it in their displays of American political history. Like that's what swag gets used for.
Fun fact, I'm a nerd and I collect like some kind of trinket of every campaign I've ever worked on. So I'm going to have my own little display here soon.
All right, cool.
All right, TV ads.
All right, I'm going to throw a poll up on this one.
All right, so TV ads. So the timeline, they typically, again, governor races and below start 3 months ahead of election day. The price, and this is, I wish I could give you a price tag. It varies radically, right? Like Los Angeles, if you want a 30-second ad on the morning, like with the Good Morning America, it's like $200,000. You know, in Denver, that same ad will cost you, you know, maybe $1,000. So it varies radically. Yep. So pros and cons to TV ads. Name ID. I think this is the best single device for name ID. It sends signals, whatever signal that message or article comes us. Con, it's expensive. And this is kind of like cable is helping us do this a little better, but it's at best semi-targeted, at very best, right? Like you can target the district maybe, but like TV models and ad agencies, like they don't do it to, you know, state legislative districts. They do it at best maybe congressional districts, and that's even a big question mark. So what do you give TV ads?
You know, this was the only one I didn't like figure out what I was going to say, so I had to just go. I did 8 because they're dang expensive, but to me if you do it right and you have the money, this is how you move the needle in a race. It's still how you move the needle. And now they have different streaming services, and I kind of group them together. I mean, it's sort of a it could go in digital too. Maybe we'll talk about that later, but I still think television is king if you have the cash.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think as much as like we're cutting the cord, we know that especially local voters, they're older, they're not cutting the cord. They're not on, Hulu and Netflix. They're still watching local ABC and NBC syndicates. The only reason I didn't give it a 10, it's because you can't like micro target, right? Like you can't target Jonathan with this specific message.
That's true. Yeah.
But other than that, like I just think there's no other way.
There's and really about 2/3 of the people were 6 and higher, and about a third were 5 and below.
Wow. If you have any reasoning on the 5 and below, put it in the chat box. I'm very interested in what people think.
We'll get to that.
All right, next one, radio ads.
Okay, I'm gonna do a poll on this one too. I think.
All right, radio ads again. Same kind of timeline, 3 months before election day. Typically, they increase the closer and closer we get to GOTV. The price ranges again, depending on what market. And this is kind of the cheat. Like, I don't know if you would include like Pandora and Spotify in this. I kind of want to. I don't know if that's a digital ad or not.
Let's just say over the air radio.
Yeah, over the air radio. But so over the air radio varies. Timeline is there. So the pros, it helps with name ID. It sends signals, right? Like it definitely sends a signal if you're advertising on like a country radio station versus like a Spanish speaking station. The cons, it can get expensive. You would have to do it at volume. Anything with name ID, it goes with volume. And the con is typically it's not targeted. Like you're not targeting a specific voter with a specific message. It's very broad and shotgun effecty. So what do you give radio ads?
I'm gonna be difficult. And I'm gonna say if you're gonna advertise on top 40 radio, don't waste your money. But I like buying specific stations that are like really tuned into specific audiences. I think those people vote. So we're talking about ethnic radio or political talk radio, PBS. Does PBS, NPR, do they sell ads now? Whatever. But so I think those I would buy radio.
Yeah.
You gave it a 5 though.
I gave it a 5.
About it. And most people agree with you. Most people are like in the 5 or 6 range here. About half our people are.
I think if, resources being unlimited, I think like, sure, throw some money at radio. I don't see it to be in the end all be all. And I don't see it being that effective, right? Like I think, so I've done a lot of work in Florida where like people love buying urban radio station ads and they're all terrible. Like they're trying to get my vote. I listen to those ads. They're not made for us. They're not made by us. They're just like, it's the major red flag. So they don't work.
Okay.
And so I think like, if it works with anything, I think it would just be name ID, quite frankly. I don't think, maybe a little bit persuasive. I don't know. But I do hear you loud and clear, especially if it's a like turnout vote, like, and I'm a Democrat, like I would be going like NPR, like, yeah. So.
Most people were 5 and above, they were, but most kind of in the middle. So.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, I don't know why this isn't loading. Let's see. All right. So,
okay. Fundraising?
It's fundraising. So, I think I know the problem now. Anytime with a GIF, it won't load. So you missed a pretty memorable GIF, everyone out there, but fundraising. The timeline is usually 18 months up right into like GOTV is when it typically happens. Pros, it's highly effective. You need money to do things. Con, it's labor intensive. So political fundraising, what do you give it?
Until campaign finance laws change, you have to fundraise from a lot of people, small amounts of money. And so if you're not doing that, you're not communicating. Those people can only vote for you once, but they hold the key to you communicating to all the other voters with their resources. So 10.
Yeah, I wish I had something else to add to that. But you need the fundraising. The other thing I will note is that, for some of us who are in coalitions working on state legislative races or municipal races or governor's races, or actually any race, but like what you'll find is those who are able to fundraise and bundle money, have a much larger say in strategy, um, essentially because for a number of reasons. But if you're a highly effective fundraiser, this is an opportunity to really leverage your organization into like a more strategical positioning. So I think that's another reason I give fundraising such a high effectiveness value, because it lets you have a bigger say in the direction the campaign is going. All right, voter registration. Voter registration, especially for a lot of these local races or even federal races, they typically happen 12 months to like 10 weeks before election day. The price ranges, but like usually it's somewhere around like 15 to like 25, maybe even like $40, depending on the organization, to get a brand new registered voter. Pros, it could be targeted. I should add an asterisk here, but like it could be targeted. Cons, unless you're doing it at volume, you're not going to make an impact. It could be very, very expensive, and like as I mentioned, it's labor intensive. So voter registration, what do you give it?
So I don't think anyone on this, in the people are hearing advice from us. I don't think it's 06. Okay, yeah, I don't. I think it's labor intensive. I think culture shifts tell people whether to register or not, campaigns or issue groups. So people aren't going to change their lifetime of experience because you hounded them to register to vote. Moments in time convince them to register to vote. All right, Christian, but why?
So I gave it a 6. So I agree with that, but I give it a 6 for the simple reason, like if you're looking at a municipal race or even a state legislative race, and if you have a partner there that has a big membership base, whether it is a parent organizing organization or a student-based organization, and they all live within that district, registering 500-600 people can make a big difference in an election. And I think it has a spillover effect, right? Like if you go and register an 18-year-old kid who's just coming out of high school, the spillover effect on the family usually has like increases of voter turnout there. So I think I agree with you. Registering 500-600 people for a governor's race or for anything that doesn't really matter, doesn't have an impact. I wouldn't put any money into it. But if you already have the bodies there and it's just like shooting fish in the barrel, I would recommend doing it.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think that's usually the scenario for these small races, that they have 500 or 600 people they can sign up. But I get you. And
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Phone banking.
All right.
The timeline is usually 16 weeks before election day. People use it for a myriad of things. It's usually somewhere around $9 per one voter contact. This is like based off like 2 different reports, but this price could vary. And as you see, the gift says like it historically been proven to move the needle 2.5 points on election day. The pros of it, it's targeted. You can talk specifically to that voter about whatever it is you want them to do. It's a low lift, like anyone can do it. Senior citizens have been doing it for years. They're the base of like phone banking. Young people can do it. Anyone can do it. Cons, again, volume, and then impact. Ignore the misspell there. The impact can vary, right? It says it changes at 2.5%. I think that's like the best case scenario, but impact, it does have an impact. So, yeah. What do you give phone banking?
I like phone banking. I give it a 6 if I'm paying for it. I give it a 7 if it's volunteers, because I like the personal touch.
So I give it a 7, and I was thinking simply volunteer based. I think people who are volunteers do a better job than paid.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah. If you have the volunteers do phone banking, I love the personal touch, and so.
If you're making me pay for it, I'd probably give it like a 4 or 5.
Okay. Yeah,
I just don't think they're that.
I'm probably with you there. I probably should have gone lower, but yeah, volunteer. Volunteers are great. Yeah. I think that's great.
All right. Canvassing. Canvassing typically happens somewhere between 4 months before election. Actually, traditionally it happens like 3 months before election day, all the way up until election day. Us at our turn, we've been known to do it like 5-6 months ahead of time until election day. The price varies, but it's somewhere around as low as maybe like $6 a vote, all the way up to like $30 a vote. So it does vary depending on how well the organization or the firm that you hired does it. Here at our turn, we pride ourselves that we bring that vote cost down, but that's just a cheap plug for us.
Okay.
Pros, targeted, very targeted, highly effective. So there's been a number of tests that been out there that said like canvassing is the single most effective thing that gets voters to turn out and to persuade them. The cons, again, if you're not doing this at volume, you're not really going to have an impact. It can get incredibly expensive, and it's very, very labor intensive. But What do you give canvassing?
So I push back on the expensive part because again, I'm thinking more about volunteer. I know you can pay them too, but like I think it actually can be a little. You have more experience with it, but I think it has some economical value. Too, I give it a 9 because I think there's nothing better than voter to voter. Hey, I'm back in Christian. You should too, to tell people to get the word out. So I like
Yeah,
canvassing.
I'm here for all that. Paid or so, and again, asterisk if they're really good at it.
Yeah,
I've had a lot of firms that are just terrible about it, and it's really a glorified lit drop. But
yeah.
let's talk about like good to great organizations that do this. It's the most effective thing. The only reason I give it a 9, and to your point, yeah, like could get expensive, like relatively speaking, but labor. It's really labor intensive and really volume intensive, right? So you have to go and knock on everyone's door at least 3 times to ensure you have an interaction with them. So it takes a while and to do it at scale. All right, digital ads. Digital ads usually start ramping up 12 weeks before election day. Price varies, but like if you do a targeted ad to a specific voter, it ranges, but around $2 a person is what you should expect to ensure they see your ad, 5-6 times. Got my favorite Larry David out there. Hope there's some Curb Enthusiasm fans out there. Pros, it's very targeted, like as targeted as you can possibly get, hopefully. Well, it is based on IP numbers, so multiple people can be using that computer, but we'll see. Cons, it's a volume game. It could get very expensive, and it hasn't been proven to be impactful. As much money as people are throwing at this, there's yet to be hard data to say that it really works to get like persuasive out there or anything of that nature. So what do you give digital ads?
So I give it a 7, and I'll wait for the mail question next to talk more about why 7, but 7 because it's kind of the go-to thing now. If you have a modest budget, it's a great way to get started. What I don't like about it is you can't say a whole lot. It's very limited in how much you can communicate. 6.
So I think digital right now, if I had unlimited budget and it like I would use it 2 different ways. So if I'm doing a presidential or even like a hot contested Senate race, I can see digital ads to serve as like red meat in fostering like a community, like via like what Trump has done, or what Bernie has done. Like they've made this like echo chamber where they really just excite their members a lot to like donate or to take action. And I think that's one way you can use digital ads. I think the other way, like the digital ads usually work, like more akin to like what we do around like state ledge and municipal races. It's really just a name ID race, right? Like
I
we're
think
not
of it
going
like
to
a
get,
new fashion billboard, a
yeah,
little more interactivity, but it's targeted. So I like it better than billboards, a lot better. Billboard, I give like a 2 to, by the way, or maybe a 1, but it is a little bit like a modern billboard. I just really like the targeted nature, and I think that's where people are going to get their information now. So you're meeting people where they are. So
that's a fascinating point, and that's probably why I would give it a higher. Like if we continue, if we had a longer debate about this, is like you are meeting people where they're at. Like they can't avoid you, and I think there's a differential, right? Like there's a difference between throwing some money behind a Facebook ad and using their targeting, which isn't very targeted. It's just based on like geographic area, not on voter history or turnout score. And I think there's a difference between that and like pre-roll, like something that you're forced to watch before you can start streaming, The Last Dance on ESPN. And I think those have a varying degrees of impact. And I think they're all different, but I think overall I give it a 6. I think if you're building a holistic budget, you have to have a digital budget in there that's robust.
well, let's do this last one and then kind of go to Q&A. I think it's a good one to end with.
All right.
I'm going to throw a poll question up for our last one here for mail. So what's your summary for mail?
Now, I've seen it start as early as 4 months before election day, but really it's usually the last 12 to 16 weeks before election day and goes all the way up right to like the day before. It varies. I just put 75 cents per piece, like that's including design and stamps and all that jazz. It's on the higher end, to be honest with you, but you can find it cheaper depending on what you want. Pros, it's targeted, goes to the house that there's voters at. I put most desired tactic. Let me just go a little bit into this. This is the number one tactic that most consultants, donors, and candidates like put their eggs in. And if you're able to provide mail, again, it allows your organization to position itself in a little bit more strategic leadership position. So that's like a pro around mail. Con, it has to be at volume or else it's not going to have an impact. It gets very, very expensive.
Very expensive.
The other thing I would put here is that my theory, and there's been some studies out there, some RCTs run, that like the impact is a fraction of what canvassing is or phone banking is. And so a lot of people put all their eggs in this basket when it hasn't been proven to be like the end all be all. So what do you give mail?
So I agree with the canvassing and phone banking is better. I do give it a 7 because I'm one of those people that I made it a little nicer this time. So you give it a 6. Well, I don't see, you're talking about digital before. I don't see any reason why mail will be more or less effective than digital. It's, every ad struggles with the fact that people are instantly they don't want to spend a lot of time with it. They're going to throw it away as quickly as they can, and they're going to doubt some of the veracity of the claims. I don't think mail or digital, I think they should just be the same, which I guess you gave them the same rating. So that's kind of what I say. And until the American public completely shuts off the mail, I think that's the way to get it in someone's hands. They're gonna get it.
Yeah. It's I think that what I'd be really curious about is like studying how people receive information, right? Like there's a reason why text banking isn't working on persuasion. And I think it's because people don't want to be persuaded on a text message. And I think like people go to different avenues and have different mindsets at different injunctions. So like, for example, you go to Facebook to get like news. So maybe a digital ad works in that case if you make it look like a news app article or like a blog.
So we had about a third of the people right in the middle. We had a couple people really high, but about almost half the people were really low on mail. So
wow,
they know something I don't. So.
Yeah, I think.
But let's get into Q&A. We're going to talk about polling in a couple weeks.
Yeah,
we're running short on time. So we had some good comments. So I'll fire them at you, Christian, and you can comment on what some of the people are saying. Let's see. Someone mentioned candidate forums on social media. That might take less work to organize. So what do you think about a social media candidate forum, Christian?
I mean, in this era, we probably have to, right? Like, I think the difficult part there is having a built-in audience. I've seen, in this age that we're doing now, I've seen a lot of, platinum recording artists going on Instagram Live, and then they can only get like 200 people when they've sold millions of records. So I think, yes, do it. You have to build towards it. But it's really hard if you don't already have a built-in like excited base to watch it.
Sure. All right. We have another question. Do you believe that vote by mail is filled with or hugely vulnerable to fraud? And do you believe that vote by mail automatically should mean that it favors Democrats? Is it a partisan play? What are you thinking?
The partisan play, I don't think it inherently favors one party or the other. I think that's the narrative right now. But like, for example, in Florida, like the number one demographic that would vote by mail up until like this cycle were senior Republican voters, right? And it was by double digits. So I don't think vote by mail affects one party or more than the other. I just think it factors into who has a larger voter demographic there. So
it's definitely conventional wisdom. I think in the Nebraska primary, it probably drove up Democratic votes more. But I think it's probably I don't know. I would say if someone was just said yes or no, does it help Democrats or Republicans, I would go with Democrats. But I think there are isolated there are cases where it helps Republicans as well. So I think that's sort of a state by state decision or observation. And then I don't think mail is filled with voter fraud. I don't, I certainly voter fraud is always something that election commissions need to be cognizant of. They need to have a good way to know they have checks in place, but I don't think there's any evidence that we have widespread voter fraud because of it.
Yeah, I agreed to all that.
Yeah. Another person just commented that they like TV too, but it's just way too expensive, and then most people in the boat, most people we're talking to just aren't going to be able to afford it, and that's fair. That's definitely the case.
I would push back on that. So like, it takes a lot more work, quite honestly. But if you're in a smaller market, right? So if you're in the New York market, Chicago, LA, or Miami market, like tune out. But if you're in any other market, for example, Denver's a relatively large market, and with $2,000, we were able to get on CNN, the local morning NBC, ABC, and CBS affiliate. Obviously, we didn't do it at a high volume, but like,
Yeah.
If you go talk directly to the TV stations that you're looking to partner with, it's surprisingly affordable.
Okay. Yeah, if you're buying New Jersey, you're not going to buy TV, but if you're buying Central Nebraska, maybe it's so yeah, take a look. Yeah, don't just give up on it. Look into it, because if you can get a TV ad, it's a good thing. We had one person push back on us a little bit, and they said that they're not hearing. We're talking about the rating, but we're not saying, okay, like swag, for example, we don't think it's very effective. But if you don't do it, does it send a signal that you're not a serious candidate in the minds of the media and the public? What do you think? And by the way, and they also mentioned, like, what if you skip a forum? I don't think a candidate should skip a forum. I think our perspective on forums is that, do you as an issue group want to hold one, is more the issue, I'd say. But talk about some of these things we rated lower, Christian. Do you think that like yard signs or swag, like you gave yard signs a 2, so are you telling the candidate or an issue group don't do yard signs? Because then what if people don't see yard signs? Like,
right.
So
Yeah.
talk about that.
I would, so really look at this through the lens of an organization, right? As an organization, should you be splitting the bill of yard signs? I would say no. But to your point, there are going to be donors out there. There are going to be activists out there and candidates themselves who are saying, look, we look like an unprofessional campaign because we don't have the traditional standard swag or yard signs. Mm-hmm. To that, I would say is push on them to spend some of their money. But, especially if it's if you're able to coordinate, like I would push them, say, like, be wise with it, buy it enough so you look respectable, but not enough that you're wasting this money. But you as an organization, you should be spending money on what gets voters to the polls. And this is why I really lean heavily into targeted things. But I do think, especially the higher you go up, whether it's presidential, Senate, Congress, like, you're absolutely right. There is a perception that, why don't you have yard signs? Why don't you have swag? So on and so forth. There is that perception. I think when you're talking about municipal, local elections, I've had a lot of local candidates say, we need to get t-shirts, we need to get iPhone covers. And I'm saying, we're lucky if 10% of the population knows your name.
I think swag's an easy one that I just wouldn't do it. I don't think anyone's going to upset because you don't have t-shirts. I made t-shirts when I ran just because I wanted a t-shirt. I wanted my own t-shirt. But I don't think, but yard signs, that's why I gave it a 5, because I do think it sends a signal that you still need to do. You just have to be realistic about its value. So it's a fair question, and I appreciate the pushback.
Yeah. No, I think it's absolutely fair, especially if you're going back and forth to donors. You do have to send them signals of, like, look how professional this campaign is. And so things like yard signs and support do go a long way. So I totally hear that. But as an independent expenditure, like, that's not where I would put my money.
So we have two last questions, and we had just like a minute here before we get to the top of the hour. So really quick, how many rounds of mail would you say is necessary to reach capacity? So if you had to do mail, how many times? And let's frame it to get a message out. You're trying to repeat a message. How many times do you have to send the mail to do that effectively?
Varies, because it depends on how much your candidate's going to do. Like, it's really, it's an arms race, but I would say like 5. Like, I would feel comfortable if I'm running for election and I was running my own race. If I put 5 pieces of mail out there with a narrative arc, like, I feel comfortable that I got my message.
My number's 3. But yeah, I do think you have to, if you are introducing a message, I would want to send at least 3 pieces of mail. And you had 5. So.
Yeah.
All right, last question. What tactic replaces canvassing in the COVID-19 era?
Deep network organizing, like just going to people and going with them and saying, let me look at your network, social, like your email list or your Facebook list, and having a media kit for them to go push to those voters. Mm-hmm. I honestly think that's the only thing, like that, and text banking and phone banking might replace it, but I'm stunted, and this is something that I'm trying to figure out myself. So any recommendations, I welcome them.
I think phones, and I was just talking to someone, get all your phone bankers together, get them all on a Zoom call, put everything on mute so they can't hear all the conversations, and just see the activity, make it a little party, just like people are having cocktail hours or whatever on Zoom. Do a phone bank with 10 people, and you can take a break every 30 minutes and socialize. So I would say phones, but I like your suggestion too of working with allies to acquire lists in new creative ways, putting time into that. So, well,
Yeah.
that's what we got. Thanks for everyone for being a part of it. We're at the hour here, and we're just getting really thankful for everything you guys are doing. We'll be on next week. We'll talk about what questions you need to ask a lawyer. Christian, do you have anything else you want to?
No, we got that's everyone, and appreciate the interaction here. Thanks everyone. Look forward to seeing you next week.
All right. Take care.